Love doesn't always begin with fireworks. Sometimes it starts in quiet moments, shared glances, and stories whispered between coffee sips. Ever since that night at the bar, the moment their eyes locked under the golden haze of music and soft lights, something inside her shifted. She didn't know what it was yet, but Thomas had left a quiet trace in her memory. A warmth, like sunlight gently touching her skin after days of rain. The next morning, she found herself smiling. Without a reason, she made coffee and paused, remembering the way his voice dipped slightly when he said her name. Strange how a stranger could suddenly feel familiar, like a story she had once heard in a dream. Fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with them. Few days later, they met again, accidentally, or perhaps destiny was just playful. A local bookstore cafe, her favorite hideout. And there he was, standing by the poetry shelf, a soft grin lighting up his face when he saw her. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said gently. "Maybe the universe is plotting something," she replied, half joking, half hopeful. They shared a table, talked for hours, not about grand ideas or big life goals, but about little things, the scent of old books, her love for rainy evenings, his habit of collecting vintage watches, the way he likes his tea, strong, no sugar, the way she hums unconsciously when she's thinking. They talked like two souls peeling. Off layers slowly, carefully, savoring every reveal. Days turned into weeks. They started meeting regularly. No labels, no promises. Just the comforting presence of each other. He would wait outside her workplace sometimes, surprising her with a cup of her favorite matcha latte. She would bring him home-baked cookies wrapped in brown paper and scribbled notes like, "For the eye, man who reads poetry and still smiles like a boy." They watched sunsets together, sat silently on park benches, or sometimes danced barefoot in her living room, laughing like kids, holding each other as if time didn't matter. One evening, snow started falling. She looked up at the sky, catching snowflakes with her lips. He stared at her, her cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling under the pale moonlight, and suddenly he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're beautiful," he whispered. She looked into his eyes, and something deeper stirred. Not the thrill of new love, but the calm of finding something true. Their first kiss wasn't fiery or wild. It was slow, tender, like two hearts speaking in a language words could never translate. She could still feel his breath on her lips long after they parted. Her heart wasn't just beating, it was blooming. In that moment, under the falling snow, a feeling quietly settled between them. Not just attraction, but a kind of belonging. And yet, somewhere deep in her soul, a fragile thought flickered. What if this was just a beautiful moment and not a forever story? They started spending more time together, not just at cafes or bookstores, but in the in-between spaces of ordinary life. He helped her carry groceries on rainy days. She surprised him at his office with a lunchbox, neatly packed and labeled, "Because you forget to eat when you're working too much." They began to know each other's rhythms, how he always stretched his fingers before typing, how she always curled her toes when laughing too hard. There were evenings when neither of them spoke much, just music playing softly in the background, their presence enough to fill the silence. One evening, as she sat curled on his couch reading a novel, he quietly walked over and placed a soft wool blanket on her lap. His hand lingered for a moment, a gentle brush against hers. She looked up, and their eyes met. Again, that quiet thunder. No words, just breath and closeness and the sound of hearts learning a new language. He began to leave little traces of himself in her world, a scarf on her chair, a book on her shelf, a toothbrush in her bathroom, and she didn't mind. In fact, she started missing those things when they weren't there. One night, as he watched her cook, hair tied messily, lips humming a forgotten tune, he whispered, "You feel like home." Her hands paused mid-motion. That sentence, so simple, so vulnerable, wrapped around her heart like a promise unspoken. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her glance, soft and trembling, said more than any words could. But with closeness came questions. She sometimes found herself wondering, was this real? Or just a beautiful chapter that would end too soon? Could hearts this gentle survive the harshness of reality? He noticed her silences, the way she sometimes drifted away in thought. He didn't push, he waited, like a quiet harbor, steady and patient. And one night, as they sat under a sky heavy with stars, she finally spoke what had been lingering in her chest. "I'm scared," she said softly. "Scared of letting you in. Too much. Scared that I might need you, more than I should." He took her hand and held it firmly. "You don't have to be unbreakable with me," he said. "I'd rather hold your fragile pieces than never hold you at all." Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer tenderness of being seen, completely, and still being held close. That night, they didn't kiss. They just held each other, tightly, wordlessly. Two hearts whispering a language older than time. If this story has touched something in your heart, let it linger a little longer by sharing it with someone who needs a little warmth tonight. Let your thoughts whisper in the comments, and if your heart still wants more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so we can meet again in another quiet night like this. End of episode 2. Please continue watching episode 3 in the next video. If you find it interesting, please share it with your friends.